This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
We're about 3 weeks into the new year. Gotta be honest, I'm kind of already over it. That's why I really don't make New Year's resolutions. I get bored too easily. Woke up this morning, saw my car covered with snow and thought, yeah, so much for that gym membership. For the record, I have been steadily working out at the gym for over 6 years now, so you can't throw rocks at me and call me out of shape or lazy. I would actually say I'm the inverse of out of shape. I'm definitely fit, lean. I'm always striving to build muscle, though, because I've always been relatively slim. Actually had a great deal of struggle actually gaining muscle mass over the years. And for the longest time of my life, up through basically my undergrad years in college, I had like no muscle mass. Kind of gives me the inspiration to keep going whenever I see some of these geeks in the wrestling business today. And I just think, dude, I'm in better shape than half these jabronis. I'm not a Roman Reigns or a Brock Lesnar size. Good Lord, on my best day, I don't think I could ever strive to get that huge. Unless I go in the juice. But man, especially when I look at some of the cats on AEW or... I'm not even going to throw shade at AEW there. Even some of the smaller guys in WWE. I'm like... I go to the gym 4 times a week. I do full body workouts. Some of these guys, I'm not convinced they've ever even sniffed the inside of a weight room. Yet most of them are on national cable television most weeks. And I'm not. So the lesson in all this, go to the gym, people. Work out. Lift things. Move your body. Don't be sedentary. It's a good life hack to live by. So what are we doing here again? Some kind of podcast? Well, why don't we get things going and see where the road takes us? We've got the Friday edition of the FSWR podcast today, which means we've got Classic NWA, Mid-South, and World Class. And for the most part, there really wasn't a whole lot going on with any of the 3 programs. I'm now just looking back at my Crockett TV notes for that January 16th show I just watched. Had to remind myself of some of the stuff again. To be fair, I watched the show like 4 or 5 days in advance, so it's been a hot minute since I opened my notes here. But why don't we get going with Crockett TV and see what happened? Because that's what the people came to hear. And after last week's dud of a program, I was kind of hoping for a bit of a turnaround. Yeah, we're still in one of those rough patch stages with Crockett now where, things are kind of just chugging along at a snail's pace. There's not a whole lot of meat right now with the weekly television product. Obviously, the big storyline right now is Luger's split from the Horsemen and everything surrounding that. We've got Dick Murdoch's bounty pursuit going after Dusty to try to take him out. And as we saw during our cold open this week, they gave us a little bit of a teaser for the Dick Murdoch-Nikita Koloff TV title match from Baltimore, where Nikita was looking quite soft. The muscle mass on him dwindles more and more with each passing week. But we will break that down shortly. First, we are back at the Atlanta studios this week, and Jim Ross is now officially Tony Schiavone's color man. Now, they still have David Crockett doing interviews, but again, they're slowly phasing him out of that color role, which is both a sad yet honestly much-needed change of pace. The look at him comments were kind of running their course over the last year. Although I will miss David marking out uncontrollably for the most basic stuff. But Jim was really good here. A little timid at times and trying to make sure he was cautious with his delivery on everything. But I thought he and Tony worked very well together. Again, Jim's a pro. He always was. Great mind for the business. Knew when to say his piece and get out of the way. Probably could have used a few more comedic blurs to get me through the opening match this week, as it is Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin versus George South and Tony Suber. Hayes and Garvin are now finally matching ring gear together. It is the closest they've come to recognizing Garvin as a freebird without overtly referring to him as one. He's still out there working like he's fucking Hawk or Animal. There were a lot of crowd pans going on this week. And, I don't know, maybe it was because it was a livelier bunch than normal. They wanted to show the hot crowd. I will say, there were a good handful of, how you say, round females in the crowd. And I don't mean plump or on the heavier side. No, some of these women, I promise you, were pushing at least 4 bills. But they very much enjoyed this match. For whatever reason. With the exception of the one poor boy who was covering his ears, trying to drown out the high-pitched whistling going on. Garvin and Hayes were at least kind enough to let South get in a little bit of offense. But pretty much like every match these guys have, in addition to it going an hour, they basically no-sell everything and do about 90 moves in a row. I did like the finishing sequence, where after South finally breaks free and tags in Suber, Garvin immediately grabs a hold of him and puts him in a headlock. And then about 10 seconds later, they hit their double spinebuster finish on Suber and pin him. So, in summation, it is the prototype late 80s Freebird match. We're going to do some shit for about 10 minutes. We're going to no-sell any offense from the other team. And we're going to work the match like the Road Warriors. And then we're going to win with our finish. And then we can follow that by doing promos where we rip off the Dudley Boys gimmick about 10 years before it ever became a thing. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe Devon and Bubba ripped off Garvin and Hayes' testify shtick. Because that is what Hayes told Garvin to do here in this promo. He outright screamed, "Testify." And Gorgeous Jimmy testified that the Horsemen were afraid of him and Hayes. That's why they have not been able to get them in the ring to fight. Meanwhile, Hayes is calling out Flair and warning him that he has his number. And when the Freebirds want something, they come and get it. I presume he was talking about Flair's World Championship, but God, who even knows anymore? Last week, everybody was making cock jokes for the entire 90 minutes. Maybe he was referencing Flair's junk. These guys were on crazy pills, so it's really hard to say. Oh, and then Precious kissed David on the cheek before leaving. And I'm pretty sure David got a boner, at least with how he sold it. And then we came back for Dick Murdoch versus Nikita Koloff for the TV title. To reiterate, in Baltimore. Brought to you in part by Raw Rolls On commercial spots. God, just when you thought, man, this match is really cooking. I'm digging the action. Bam! Commercial break to the face. Totally killed the momentum. And by the time we hit the third break spot here, it's like, well, it's obviously they're going to a time limit draw. Still, there's a lot to unpack here. Not just the match itself, but, of course, everything that transpired afterwards. When it was over, the first thing I said to myself was, Dick Murdoch has to be the most underrated professional wrestler of all time. At least in the top 5. I'm serious, man. Watching his work in this match, on top of the fact that he was a phenomenal heel, it's one of those things where you realize he doesn't have to do all that much to get the people invested. All he has to do is work smart rather than working hard. Just the subtle things like him cowering in the corner when Nikita was teasing, punching him in the face. Like the moments later where he was working over Nikita's arm, using underhanded means to stay in control behind the ref's back. Again, he's not doing anything to compromise his health. He's just being an old school Southern brawler. He's the kind of guy that can make Nikita a great babyface in peril. Think about that. And especially when you wind it down to the last few minutes and the clock is ticking, and they already did the ref bump to allow Murdoch to gain the upper hand. And by that point, you had all the baby faces and heels clearing the locker room to cheer on their opposing parties. Cornette had given Nikita the racket shot to the back prior, but of course the ref wasn't there to see it. But no one's running interference after that. Instead, it's a bloody Murdoch trying to hit Nikita with everything he can. Nikita keeps kicking out. Crowds popping for every near fall because they're staying with Nikita and trying to rally behind him. And finally, Murdoch can't put away Nikita with a pile driver. And the time expires. Both men are laying flat on their backs, like they've literally been through a war. And then we get all the post-match stuff with the Midnights attacking Dusty. Murdoch tries to go up top to destroy Dusty's arm while the Midnights are pinned down. And then here comes Barry Windham with a tennis racket, sends everybody running. By this point, the crowd's all wet themselves to the point of hysterics. But it's a super heated angle, great action, awesome TV segment. This is the kind of segment we needed on last week's show. Instead of 80 minutes of boring squashes plus 10 minutes of artificial PWI award presentations. These are the kinds of things, though, that we need emphasized on the weekly programs. I loved everything about it. Especially with all the personal stuff going on in Nikita's life around this point. Hey, man, props to him for going out there and working his ass off. I'm sure he had a lot on his plate at the time, but he didn't let that get in the way of his performance. He was a pro. He also did a pretty good promo after the commercial break, reflecting back on the match at the studio and talking about all the tough men he's shared the ring with over the years, saying that Dick Murdoch may be the toughest challenge he's ever faced. He actually brought up their history from last year, too. If y'all remember this, there was the infamous TV angle where Murdoch tried to give Nikita the pile driver on the floor to break his neck. I'd actually forgotten about that until he mentioned it here. Remember all the shows afterwards where Nikita came out with a neck brace on and talked about not getting cleared by the doctors to compete? Kind of put him on the shelf for a while. That was good attention to detail. And then he told Murdoch, Cornette, and the Midnights if they want to stick their nose in Nikita's business, I'll fuck around, find out, basically. That was the extent of the message. By the way, I love how now that Big Bubba's not with the company anymore, they just kind of put Dick Murdoch in that security guard role, and, well, now he's there to fill the void. Like Big Bubba never happened. They've just moved on. And then it was back to the ring for, well, as David noted, a 6-man tag match. Okay, now keep that in mind. The match, it's the Warlord and the Barbarian versus Clement Fields and Keith Steinborn. 6-man tag. I guess we did not account for the Invisible Man on both teams. Or who knows, maybe he saw Ivan out there and just figured, oh, it must be a 6-man. Well, it was not a 6-man. It was the Powers of Pain beating up and throwing around 2 job guys for several minutes while Paul Jones talked about how mean, bad, and ugly his army is. It was fine for a 2-minute squash. Stretch that out to 5. It was very boring and very tedious. And then they finally went over with a backbreaker diving headbutt combo. And then, speaking of long-winded segments that very much overstayed their welcome, we followed that with a Paul Jones Army promo at the booth, where they basically took about 8 minutes to plug the January 30th date, the upcoming bench press contest against the Road Warriors. Paul talked about the fact that nobody is capable of bench pressing 700 pounds outside his 2 men. Ivan talked about all the things Dusty and the Road Warriors took from Ivan and his family in the last 2 years. Most notably the 6-man World Championships. And now it's time for the Army to take from Dusty and the Warriors. They're going to take the LOD's pride, along with the $50,000 award that comes with it. And that was it. What did that take me? Approximately 45 seconds to sum up. It took these guys an hour to deliver this promo, just regurgitating the same talking points over and over again. Sounded like a Tony Khan Twitter plug for Dynamite. January 30th, bench press contest, live, watch now. January 30th, Road Warriors and the Powers of Pain, 700 pounds. Who's the strongest? Find out, live. January 30th, live. I was like, dude, shut up. We get it. Move on with the show. We didn't even get any Paul Jones comedic relief here. By his standards, it was a pretty paint-by-numbers promo. So in essence, this was both unnecessarily long and unexciting. That's what she said. At least when it comes to JJ and Flair's rambling promo this week, at least that was entertaining. I didn't even understand half the references here. Something about a Boston Celtics, Los Angeles Lakers basketball game. I guess the Horsemen were doing some traveling. They went to either Boston or LA. I don't know. The only thing of note I got out of this was Flair talking about the fact that after their next Horseman sports venture, they're going to go to Honolulu, Hawaii, and do some spicy dancing with all the girls in hula skirts. And it was at this point where they panned the camera out to a very stunning blonde in the audience, very unamused by this commentary from the Nature Boy. He also called Michael Hayes a poor man's Ric Flair, which, I know he's a heel, but it's kind of hard to argue that assertion. I mean, Buddy Landell was a poor man's Ric Flair, but at least he would have owned up to it. With Michael Hayes, you never know. That guy lives his gimmick 24/7. So he probably actually believed he was Ric Flair at one point. Then we had Ron Simmons versus Cody Starr, which went about 2 minutes, and then Simmons went over with a second rope shoulder tackle. I was kind of mesmerized by Cody Starr's turquoise-colored singlet. Actually, it wasn't even really turquoise. It was like almost a sky blue shade. It was not very appealing for a guy with such a rotten physique. That's really all there is to say about that. And then we had another one of those heart-to-heart promo exchanges with Ron Simmons and David Crockett after the break, doing another one of those man of the people speeches, speaking for all the hard-working men and women out there that come home drenched in sweat, the middle-class workers that the Horsemen look down upon. Talks about working hard for everything he's ever gotten. Talks about the struggles he went through in training camp to advance up the ranks in football. And it's the same pathway for his wrestling career. He's wrestled the prelims, and now he's ready to step up to the plate and go after the big guns. And again, they're giving you every indication that you got to keep your eyes peeled for this guy. Big things cometh for Ron Simmons in the future of wrestling. It's very good, too. They're not, beating you over the head with the idea that he's going to be a future world champion. But they just want to have you invest in him now and rally behind him while he's still climbing up the ladder, because it gives you that sign of hope that he'll be the next huge breakout babyface star. If only it didn't come at a time when WCW was practically in the doldrums, probably would have had a bigger impact in the business. Then we had the Rock and Roll Express going over Alan Martin and Steve Atkinson in a quick squash. At this point, I'm just kind of counting down the weeks, knowing that Ricky and Robert are already basically out of the door with the company anyway. It's kind of weird still seeing them winning matches, though. Like, you can totally tell these guys don't give a flying fuck anymore. Especially Robert. The ending to this match was the clearest indication of that. They're in there running wild, and at one point they turn around to face Atkinson. And out of the blue, after already having exchanged a brief glance together, Gibson goes up to throw a dropkick to Atkinson, but Morton just kind of stands there and looks at Gibson like, dude, we didn't time that. So, 10 seconds later, they just set up Atkinson near the ropes, and you can hear Morton clearly call, "Double drop kick." Then, of course, they hit it. I was like, God, these guys are so fucking done. They're just hanging around to collect a paycheck at this point. It was the most out-of-sync rock and roll match I think I've ever seen, where they were completely on separate pages, just going through the motions. Ricky was having his match. Robert was doing his own thing, totally not trying. It was so wacky. And then they did a post-match promo, yet again calling out these sheep herders in a feud that never actually goes anywhere because these guys are basically gone from the company in like 2 weeks. What was really ominous here was Ricky's earlier comment in the promo about when it comes to the rock and roll, they can not be used, but they can't be abused. And I was like, was that a shot at The Office? I think Ricky Morton just did a shoot promo on Jim Crockett and the financial team. Well, that's how I read it. Again, we all know these guys are getting stiffed on pay anyway. Maybe that was part of the bargaining chip when they said, all right, fine, we just won't use you guys. We'll pay you through the rest of your contracts, but we're not giving you much of the way in anything in screen time. So then Ricky came out and said, well, that's fine, don't use us. But you can abuse us. sticking it to the man. They also aired footage of the sheep herders attacking the Rock and Roll in a post-match angle during one of the syndicated shows, using a flagpole, no less. I believe Ricky referred to it as a steel pole. Because, of course, I mean, it's wrestling after all. Every weapon is fucking steel. Steel ring steps, steel ring posts, steel bats, steel chairs, steel boots, steel flagpoles. What's next? The steel wooden board? That was Hacksaw Duggan's missing gimmick. A steel board. Should have retired the wooden plank and then gone with the steel instead. He would have won more matches. So that was all rather weird. Just that whole Rock and Roll Express run in the closing months right before their departure. Well, the first one. Again, I know they come back later on in the year for a brief stint, but we kind of don't talk about that because it was like another 2 weeks and then they were gone again. Oh, this company's going to hell in a handbasket. But considering how integral those guys were on this show for the last 3 years, it's crazy to see where they are now in the pecking order. And then you compare it to guys like Arn and Tully. Again, they also had a match this week with Lee Peak and Ed Franks. God. The two most easily punchable jobbers on the entire show. But, Tully in particular was having a blast beating up these guys. It was, it was very basic. Horsemen took turns working him over methodically. Peak and Franks were savagely destroyed. And Double A eventually hit Franks with the spine buster and then tagged in Tully for the slingshot. And then we came back for a Luger promo. And boy, did he have a lot to say. That is for sure. He immediately began his promo, however, by unbuttoning his shirt and then flexing for the camera. To which I then asked, why does this man ever bother to come out with a shirt every week? Would it not just make more sense for him to come out topless? Especially when you know he's just going to take the shirt off anyway. I'm just asking. But he called out the Horsemen for being all about their possessions and luxury items. They re-showed the footage of Luger getting jumped on various occasions by Tully and Arn. Later on JJ. And again, it was a very long promo. I didn't write down word for word everything he said. Got to be sitting here for an hour trying to recount everything. He did take a moment to thank the people and acknowledge that he's appreciative for the people that supported him along the way. Said that amidst his beef with Tully and Arn, his end game is to get his hands on Ric Flair and hurt him where it hurts the most. Of all the things that Flair holds near and dear to him, the one thing he's proven he can't live without is the world's heavyweight title. The girls, the money, the watches, the suits, that's all surface level stuff. But the world's heavyweight title is the one thing that fuels Flair in the sport. And without the title, that means his pockets are going to become more empty and the luxury lifestyle is going to be in jeopardy. So Luger's here to issue that in 1988, he will get his revenge on everybody in the Horsemen, including Flair, to prove to the world why he's the total package. And again, all fairness, it was a good promo, kind of long, probably dragged on for a little longer than necessary, but it was good material. And it's more assurance as the weeks go by, just how over he continues to be with the fans. It was probably a little more exaggerated this week. Mostly in that 98% of the crowd was female, so Of course, they all love topless Luger. But the way they're going about building the story is perfect. Luger working his way through each individual member of the Horsemen, beginning with the Enforcer, and of course the final boss being Flair. And I forgot to mention too, we've also got Ole in the equation, because he'll be teaming with Luger to go after Tully and Arn. And that makes sense from story material dating back to a year ago when the Horsemen turned their backs on Ole and left him for dead. So it's a little bit of a redemption story for Ole too. Because I don't think he ever got his revenge. Now that I'm thinking about it for a minute. It's good stuff. From there, we came back for Mike Rotunda versus Larry Wayne. The new and improved Mike Rotunda, I might add. Now that he's officially aligned with Kevin Sullivan, he's now rocking the new clean look. Coming out with the Syracuse amateur gear and the fight song to go with it. And as I've talked about many times on this channel, my favorite incarnation of Mike Rotunda, it was definitely the Varsity Club gimmick. It was light years better than fucking IRS or Michael Wall Street. But Rotunda looked good here. Did some nice mat work, beat the guy to powder, won with the double underhook suplex. And then we had a phenomenal promo segment with Sullivan and Rotunda with David. They're talking about Nikita Koloff, and Sullivan's telling him that Dusty's setting him up for failure, and he better rest easy, knowing that he's got several men breathing down his neck, going for that World's TV title. And then randomly in the middle of this promo, Rotunda interjects by telling the fans that they better start appreciating a real world-class athlete. As the first honorary member of the Varsity Club, ahead of Rick Steiner, Rotunda is here to be the standout performer in the group. And then my favorite moment of the show, totally unscripted, totally accident has happened, but it was too perfect. As the heels depart and they leave David Crockett in the dust, Rotunda accidentally catches himself in the microphone cord, rips the mic directly out of David's hands, and then David just looks at the camera and shrugs his shoulders. I absolutely died watching this. I think I rewound it like 10 times. Kept getting funnier each time. Just the look on David's face afterwards. So glad they kept that in. And then we came back for a fired up Horseman promo, courtesy of AA, Tully, and JJ. All of them are out there taking shots at Luger's promo from earlier. God. Tremendous. You know, JJ's joking about the fact that when the Horsemen travel to the finest restaurants across the country, nobody's been asking where the guy with all the muscles disappeared to. Because everybody knows who the real franchise players in the Horsemen are. Tully talking about the fact that the Horsemen groomed Luger into the man he is today. And while he's at home trying to convince himself and his friends and his family that he's half the men that the Horsemen are, if he puts the work in, maybe someday he'll reach the Cruise level. But right now he can stand at the bottom of the ladder and look up at the real stars of the group. And that was all well and good. But fucking Arn, dude. Arn blew everybody out of the water here, saying that Luger's got the smile that only a mother and a dentist could admire. And while he's got a great body, it's the only thing that ever made him a standout member of the Horsemen. But now that he's on the outside looking in, he's one of the flock. Arn considers it an insult that Luger would come out here and completely undercut Tully and Arn, going straight for the top dog in the group. Arn and Tully aren't pushovers, damn it. If Luger wants the Nature Boy, he's got to go through the other measuring sticks of the team. And as for that no-good Ole Anderson, well, as Arn put it here, he's just another misfit that they put out with the bricks. mic drop moment there. Yeah. It is virtually impossible to hate these men. I am now convinced of it. I don't care how mean these guys are. They're all too great a promo for me to boo them. Just going out there and smoking Luger on the microphone. Telling Luger that he ain't shit without the other horsemen. They're the ones that made him relevant. They made him a must-see attraction. Now that he's decided to go Hollywood and abandon his morals, well, now he gets to suffer as a result. It's great stuff, man. The wordsmiths of this program coming through again here on NWA Crockett TV in 1988. And then we went to the ring for Dick Murdoch versus Dave Spencer, which was very concise. Murdoch went over with a brainbuster in about a minute, where he also still managed to get in about 6 illegal chair shots in a row. But Teddy Long just kind of let the match continue anyway. The only other thing of note here was Jim Cornette's comment about the fact that he's not sure if barbed wire exists in Russia, but he knows it exists in Texas. And he knows that Murdoch is going to run some barbed wire over Dusty's head if he gets the chance. So as I reflected back on that comment, I said, No, I'm pretty sure that barbed wire exists in Russia, Jim. There was this little thing called the Gulag at one point. It's kind of a big thing throughout the 20th century. One may also have referred to them as camps. So, you know, imprisoned soldiers. Pretty sure barbed wire was involved. In any case, more follow-up with Cornette and Murdoch. Corny doing the promo at the booth, talking about how disreputable and disgusting Dick Murdoch is, which is exactly why they get along. Because Cornette knows what makes Murdoch happy, and that's money. He knows that Mama Cornette's bounty will come through, because that's all the motivation Murdoch needs to end Dusty's career. 2 fists and a lump sum of cash. And then Murdoch screamed a bunch of incoherent shit, and I don't remember what he said. But I remember his face was beet red by the end. With Corny marking out the whole time, rubbing his hands together. And, the ending was Murdoch vowing to brainbuster David Crockett, which Cornette said he would pay double to see that. And then he called David a goof. I laughed. And then to round it out, we had Ivan Koloff versus Mike Jackson in a completely boring squash that I barely paid any attention to. Frankly, I don't even remember what happened. All I know is Ivan won with a botched sickle. Totally blanked on everything else that happened. We were 80-something minutes in by this point, people. When I saw the last match on this show was Ivan Koloff in a match, I nearly stopped the show right there. But at least there was some good stuff to come out of this one. I mean, the Murdoch-Nikita stuff was fantastic. You know, all the stuff going on with Luger and the Horsemen right now, that's great. The promos in particular, that's what's selling the feud. And again, this is a noted down period for the NWA in 88. To be honest, the shows don't really start to pick up again until like Bash season over the summer. You know, everything right now is just kind of coasting along. So in a lot of ways, I'm kind of grasping at straws to talk about things. It wasn't a bad show, but I mean, you could definitely see why they were struggling for ideas around this point. Again, the best thing they had going was Luger's babyface split from the Horsemen. Beyond that, it's just kind of a generic wrestling show with a lot of name power. and not a lot of creative ideas to back it. And that's not the story when it comes to Mid-South Wrestling. This was the hot period where they had plenty of creative ideas, in addition to all the great talent they had circulating around this point. Now, last week, we had a few new faces show up on the scene. Dr. Death, the great Kabuki, Gary Hart, just to name a few. You know, that roster rotation really does help to keep things fresh, you know? You don't get burnt out on seeing the same people over and over again. You've obviously got your central stories with the top guys in the territory who are more the mainstays. And then you got other people showing up from other places too. Like take, for example, the opening match this week. They brought in Kevin Von Erich to work a match with Mike Bond. Now, just a simple little prelim match. But everyone knew Kevin from the Dallas region. He was obviously a homestead down there. And this is very timely, too, because we had just seen the Freebird heel turn at the end of '82. So the Von Erichs were one of the bigger news headlines in the wrestling media around that point. And again, this is when Bill Watts and Fritz had that loose working agreement for talent exchanges. In addition to everything going on with Paul Bosch in Houston. I think we saw Kerry in Mid-South a few times as well. But again, their positions were very different from their Dallas run. It was more of a cross-promotion thing to get the names on TV. But they weren't ever really factored into the crucial on-screen storylines like a Junkyard Dog or Rat Pack or Mr. Wrestling 2. So there wasn't much of this beyond putting Kevin over in a quick little squash. It's kind of hard to hear the fans here just because of the way they were filtering in Boyd's commentary. Probably sounded like crickets to the people watching on TV at the time. But there were mild babyface pops for Kevin here. Obviously, he wasn't going to be as over here as he was in his home turf, per se. But still, just to be able to have that name on your show as a trade-off, it's a big deal. You know, especially with how popular the Von Erichs were around this point. And then we went to an Iron Mike Sharp versus Yoshiatsu match. I believe this was a pre-tape from a match these guys had back in '82. Now, last time we saw Sharp on TV, he was mostly relegated to working tag matches with guys like Mr. Olympia. So you could tell he was kind of being phased out as one of the top guys in the territory by this point. Quite frankly, the only reason I knew it was a replay is that Bob Roop was doing color for this one. And they already showed Boyd Pierce in Wrestling 2 at the commentary booth at the beginning of this taping. So, I figured it was older film. Again, just a quick little showcase for Mike Sharp. Nothing really much to say about it. I'm pretty sure Sharp was already signed with the WWF by this point, or he was at least in negotiation for that contract, so he might have already had one foot out the door with Mid-South by this time anyway. I don't know, this might have been one of those we have it in the can kind of matches, so fuck it, go ahead and air it. We got time to kill. It was actually something I was wondering about during the first 15 to 20 minutes of the show. The first 3 matches they aired were all previously aired matches dating back to last year. I was wondering, okay, well, did they just air these because they didn't have a lot of new content tape for this week? So they needed to fill time? I don't know, I thought it was very weird. And that brought us to Mr. Wrestling 2 versus Hiro Matsuda, the third and final of the so-called encore matches for the week. Again, good little match. They kind of set this one up beforehand with Wrestling 2 putting over Matsuda a little bit and recognizing him as a tough opponent. But it's just a basic enhancement match to put Wrestling 2 over. One thing I do like about Bob Roop's commentary here, the fact that he's trying so hard to be unbiased while calling the ring action, at the same time, he can't help but take jabs at Wrestling 2 whenever he gets the chance. He's like, Wrestling 2 really knows how to rally up the people to start those 2 chants. I think it's irritating. But I have to respect it. I'm just like, really, dude? You had to throw that in there? But, yeah, I mean, that was more or less half the program right there. And then we go back to the ring after break for, I think, what ended up being the first match for this week's set of tapings. It is a tag match with Tim Horner and Buddy Landel going up against Kamala and the Great Kabuki. And again, this stems from last week where Skandar Akbar and Gary Hart had been negotiating a contract for a working agreement, basically having Kabuki and Hart align with Devastation Incorporated to become the ultimate superpower. And, well, there was definitely a little bit of hesitation at first. Still appears to be that way after this little promo exchange between Hart and Akbar, where Hart's basically reaffirming that Akbar is going to have to pay up if Kabuki is being sent out to solve Devastation Inc.'s business. Gary Hart loves to pad his pockets, and he knows that Akbar can supply the bank, but he wants to assure that he's not going to get stiffed on anything, because he's a businessman, you see. It's one of those great story details where you have 2 slimeball heels working together, but they're both lying, conniving thieves. So you can totally buy that either one of them would stab the other in the back at any time. And that's kind of the beauty of it. But as things stand, Kabuki and Kamala appear to be on the same page. I did pay attention to Reeser Bowden's reaction during this little promo exchange. God couldn't help himself but nod and wink at the camera on like 4 different occasions. I'm like, way to break the illusion of kayfabe, dude. But they had an interesting layout for this match. You had Kabuki in there basically doing all the work for his team while Kamala was on the apron pacing around. And after Kabuki basically dominated the entire match, he tags in Kamala at the very end. And then he comes in and hits Landel with a series of splashes for the 3 count. That was pretty much the extent of his involvement. So again, kind of going back to Hart's comment before the match. All right, dude. My Kabuki did the bulk of the work here. All Kamala did was get the pin. So you owe me a good sum of money for what ended up essentially being a handicap match. So we'll see if Akbar pays up. We'll see what this working relationship goes in the coming weeks. Then we came to Hacksaw Duggan versus Bruno Sammartino Jr. And, minus the elevated back body drop where I didn't think Sammartino was going to clear. It was pretty fun. And here's the thing I love about watching Mid-South, especially in comparison to, say, a World Class. Even when you get shows that are wrestling heavy, none of the matches ever look or come across the same in execution. There are always subtle little nuances that help to make each match unique in some way. Like, even if everybody knows Duggan's going over here, you had the early portion where Duggan was feeding a little bit for Bruno, getting pissed off that he was getting out-wrestled on the mat and couldn't break anything. He was trying to bail out to the floor and stall for time to regain his composure. And it's like you compare that to all the other matches on the card. No other match was like this. And that's always something that stands out with Mid-South matches. Everybody's match was different. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you had enough varieties and styles of working where for every Chavo Guerrero you had that was good for the faster stuff and more of the breathtaking athletic stuff. Like, you also had the sluggers and the street fighters like Duggan and JYD. They weren't going to be doing drop kicks and aerial dives. But there was always variety and flavor with Mid-South. Not everybody looked the same. Nobody did the same shit. And it's very refreshing in a lot of ways. And we see that problem in today's product. Like, how many interchangeable matches do you see every week on AEW or WWE? Where you just think, if I replace this generic spot monkey with this other generic spot monkey and then stuck them in the same ring, it'd be the exact same fucking match every time. Because everybody does the same shit. And nobody tries to be a personality anymore. Unless you're an MJF or a Roman Reigns or somebody that naturally gets it. And they're very few and far between. But I never watch a Mid-South program and think, all these matches look the same. Now, yes, Duggan did eventually gain control and go over. Once he was able to cut off Bruno, he pretty much had the match in the bag. But even in the finish, Duggan goes to knock Bruno out of the ring with a spear tackle, but instead of just going for the regular pin, they actually have Bruno bump out to the floor, and it ends up resulting in a count-out win for Duggan. And that kind of makes sense, Like, even if David Sammartino was never going to be on his father's level in terms of star power, he was still a notable name. I could see them not wanting to beat him clean here. At least the count-out kind of gives him an outing. But I enjoyed this. As did I the TV main event this week. Better known as the Special Challenge match. It is Chavo Guerrero versus Gino Hernandez in a grudge match to settle a beef dating all the way back to Houston. And as you may recall from the video feed, there was a previous six-man tag that took place in Houston shortly before Christmas of '82. And originally, Chavo was supposed to be one of the three babyfaces on the team. But during the period of the first fall, Gino had entered the ring to hit Chavo with a folding chair, which took Chavo out of the match with an injury. So Wrestling 2 had to fill in for the third partner, which he had brought up here on commentary. So as you would probably expect, it was heated from the get-go. And they were pretty much going at it right from the opening bell. And it was a pretty steady back-and-forth fight for the most part. And they certainly worked it like two guys with a score to settle. Gave it plenty of room to breathe. The great thing, too, is that they had Boyd doing the countdown thing for like the closing 5 minutes or so, just to give the match a sense of urgency. And again, that's another thing that always makes Mid-South matches so fun. The idea that as they're getting closer to the end of their runtime for the program, you never really knew if you were going to get a direct finish or not. And nowadays, because of how everything's micromanaged with time constraints, you always know you're going to get some type of finish before the end of the show, even if it isn't a clean one. Well, think about that for a minute. When is the last time a modern wrestling program went off the air with a match still in progress? Well, caveat there, not counting AEW Dynamite when people's DVRs cut out at the top of the hour because they suck in managing their time window. I'm like talking intentional. But the way they did it was perfect. Right as Chavo's milking the comeback, he goes to hit a series of flying forearms to Gino, but he accidentally takes out the official in the closing minute. I like how Boyd's first statement after the ref bump, he goes, well, we're definitely not going to have time for that standby match with Iron Mike Sharp this week. I'm like, that was your first thought? There's a dead official lying on the floor right now, Boyd. Can we show a little bit of concern? And so the ref bump allowed for them to do the collision spot where they bonk heads. And while Chavo's on the floor selling, Gino goes out to grab a folding chair. And where does he locate said chair? From General Skandar Akbar, who had been scouting on the floor. Yep. He just voluntarily gave up his seat so Gino could use his chair as a weapon. Rather suspect. And of course, it backfires. Gino goes to swing the chair at Chavo, but Chavo kicks him in the gut, and he ends up grabbing the chair and clocks Gino over the head with it. And right as the official comes to, Chavo gets on top for the 3 count. A somewhat disputed finish if you want to argue semantics. But it was a cathartic close to the show. Gino tried to cheat, but he got played. Got a taste of his own medicine. It's what you like to see. So that was good. Great finish of the show. Awesome match. No complaints. And even though I was a little confused with the formatting of the first 20 or so minutes, the new stuff they taped for this week was fantastic. It was nice having Wrestling 2 on commentary. I don't think this is the only time we have Wrestling 2 joining on color. Definitely a handful of times in the coming months, we'll see that. But he added a lot. Very good insight. Very buttoned down, very serious. It's what you like to see. He never got in the way. He said his piece when he needed to. Good stuff. Now, generally this one didn't move the needle forward with any heavy angles or major things to advance the top feuds. But they did enough to keep the ball rolling. I think this might have been the final set of their most recent taping block. Because as I noted from the top, the new content was very limited on this one. Well then, it was a rough one to get to that main event. But boy, howdy was it worth it. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself here, we are obviously talking about world-class championship wrestling now. I know I kind of just segued into that one. We are also post-Christmas Star Wars, so I believe this is the first official set of new tapings for 1985. Notice how I said it was rough until we got to the main event. And I really don't know how else to describe this other than equating it to Bad Omens. When they started the show here with Kelly Kiniski versus Buck Zumhoff, well, my first thought was, are they already phoning it in for the year? Had they just completely given up? My God. Talk about scraping from the bottom of the barrel. I mean, this is the kind of match you book when you realize that half the fucking roster missed their plane flight. And these are the only 2 guys sitting around the locker room. And even then, I would probably have to think twice before booking it. Bill Mercer informed us before the bell that Zumhoff has acquired a new boombox. But did he also acquire any wrestling skill? The answer to that was an apparent hell no. He's still the drizzling shits. And to be blunt, Kiniski wasn't much better. There were some takedown spots early on in this match where I wasn't convinced these guys weren't wrestling in quicksand. Looked awful. There were long stretches where they were just kind of on the mat in stationary holds, which, frankly, was probably better than anything they actually tried in the match. The only other thing I noted was the incredibly dumb yet laughable finish. As Buck Zumhoff goes to do his Hulk up spot where he turns on the boombox. Of course, the audio is atrocious, so we can't even hear anything coming out of the speakers. But while Zumhoff is trying to fire up on Kiniski with the music playing in the background, we see Kiniski cut off Zumhoff immediately, catch him with a backbreaker off the ropes, and pin him. So in other words, Buck Zumhoff was defeated here via too much adrenaline. He was trying so hard to fire up on Kiniski that it ultimately backfired. and he was defeated. So that sucked a wet dick. And then we came back for Rip Oliver versus Terry Daniels. And I think this is our first time seeing Terry Daniels in the Dallas region. I recognized the name from Mid-South immediately. I believe when he debuted as an underneath guy there, he went by Private Terry Daniels with the full military outfit and everything. And of course, now I'm blanking on the year that Mid-South run would have been. Was it 83 or 84? I vaguely remember them giving him a little bit of a push when he had shown up in the territory. Then pretty soon they had dropped the Private gimmick altogether and just made him ordinary Terry Daniels. Never really broke out beyond the undercard during Watts' regime. There really wasn't too much to this one beyond giving Rip another enhancement win. But I actually thought Terry Daniels looked really good in this match. Like they had done a spot about midway through where Oliver sidestepped Daniels and sent him flying out to the floor. When Daniels hit the ground, he started favoring the left shoulder immediately. And that opened up the door for Rip to work that over for the heat. And they let Daniels make a little bit of a comeback before getting cut off at the end. And then Rip caught Daniels with a shoulder breaker for the 3. The whole thing only went about 3 minutes, but it was solid. You could tell Daniels was trying to make a mark for himself. So good on him. I'm honestly not sure if we'll be seeing more of him on more world-class shows in the future. But he was perfectly fine here for what I saw. Definitely added more to this show than Kelly Kiniski or Rock and Roll Buck Zumhoff did. And then we went to a sit-down segment with Bill Mercer, Sunshine, and Billy Haynes. No longer going by Billy Jack in the world-class territory. He has now decided to explicitly refer to himself as Billy Haynes as an homage to his father. And I'll kind of break down each segment of material they talked about here before I give you my general take on everything that happened. Now, one thing I vaguely recall about Billy Jack's run in Crockett Promotions, as short-lived as it ended up being, I remember he had done a series of promos talking about his father and the fact that he wasn't in good health around this point. He had diabetes, was basically bedbound, unable to walk or basically see. So I guess you could say he was legally blind. So the purpose of the name change was so Billy could pay respect to his father. And of course, that's always sad when you hear stories like that. But it does give the Billy Haynes character a level of babyface sympathy, so this is a good detail to add to the backstory. And as far as Sunshine goes, while she would not consider herself Billy's manager or valet, the reason Billy's associated with her is that Sunshine had actually given Billy her collection of Dallas tapes. And if y'all remember, those were the tapes she had stolen from gorgeous Jimmy Garvin when she was filming his matches back in the day. Of course, there was all that drama during the breakup between those two where, Sunshine had broken into Garvin's home and then stolen the entire tape library. So I have to imagine those are the tapes she was referring to, which is fucking awesome. I'm glad they remember that little detail. But, she thought Billy had potential as a world champion, so she wanted to align herself with Billy and see if he could live up to the hype. And the general summation of everything here was basically unlived potential. After watching the entire promo sit down, I was like, yeah, it's unfortunate all of this basically became null and void by the next month. Because, Billy Hayes was basically gone from Dallas not too long after this initial taping block. In a way, it's kind of hilarious. Like, they're putting all this stock behind Billy Haynes as the next big thing in Dallas. By February, he's basically gone. That is how you say Poor planning. Promo was good, though. I didn't have any issues with that. And the issue was the fact that this whole segment was basically pointless at the end of the day. But it did tie in with the following match. It is a Billy Haynes squash with... some geek named Shawn Michaels. No. Never heard of him. Actually, I believe Mark Lorenz pronounced it Nichols. Even though the graphic clearly said Michaels. And Shawn, I believe, was also spelled differently. They spelled it S-E-A-N. Interesting. So yeah, obviously for those that don't know, Shawn had broken into the business about a year prior to this, training under Jose Lothario's headship. I think he started in Mid-South in 84, came over here to work in Dallas in early 85. And around this time, too, I think he had also done work in the Central States region, which is where we met Marty Jannetty, actually. And, of course, we all know about the Rockers. That was when they finally went to the WWF in 88. I believe they were technically called the Midnight Rockers, though, when they were wrestling in the AWA. So, this obviously predates WWF Shawn. This was well before he was sporting the blonde mullet and was rocking the Heartbreak Kid gimmick. Here he was just plain old vanilla ice cream Shawn Michaels. Blander than a plank of tree bark. Just getting served up to Billy Haynes here. Watching the whole thing in hindsight, though, and knowing the performer Shawn would wind up becoming like a decade later, like you watch the finish of this match, like Shawn trying to get all fancy with doing the moonsault out of the corner, and while he's showboating to the crowd, Haynes just grabs him and immediately submits him with a full Nelson. I mean, I laughed. It's the archetypal Shawn Michaels we've all come to know and love. Yeah, he was even trying to hog the spotlight back then. Only difference is that, they could beat him clean at this point and he wasn't going to pitch a fit about it to the office. Not unless he wanted to get thrown out on his ass for refusing to do jobs. So this is kind of beautiful in a way. The egomaniac was out of control even back then. Still, though, all kind of goes back to the Mid-South conversation we've been having with other guys like Tully and Arn, right before they broke out of their shell and became big stars in the business. The same can be said for Shawn. Like, you could even see here in 85 that he had something. As green as he was at the time, there was a certain charm to him. Even if I couldn't stand the guy through the entirety of the 90s, at least I could kind of see why Vince would want to push him. But that brought us to the TV main event for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. It's Ric Flair defending against Freebird Terry Gordy. And before we get to the joyous occasion that was this match, let's talk about the joyous occasion that was the pre-match angle. Just to set the playing field here, before they rang the bell to start it, out come Sunshine and Billy Haynes. And Billy basically establishes that he wants the winner of this title match. Whether it's Flair or Gordy, he doesn't really care. He believes that he's earned the right to challenge. So as he goes to shake both men's hands, Flair will not reciprocate. He will, however, be the Nature Boy. So, as expected, Flair gets on the house mic and tells Sunshine that he's about to offer her something she can't refuse. If she gives Flair a kiss on the lips, she will never look at another man again. Guaranteed. This is also where I wrote down, Space Mountain has now opened for the season, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, it's Flair being Flair. In addition to him hitting on Sunshine, he also puts down the Dallas fans and talks about the fact that he's got the best private jet and all the best material possessions in the world. But Sunshine tells Flair, "All right, Rick, I'll play your game." So she, in fact, gives Flair the kiss. And when Flair goes to ask her what she thinks, Sunshine gives Flair a full slap right across the face. Palm first. Of course, Flair sells it perfectly. He tries to make a move on Sunshine, but Billy immediately gets in the way to stop him. And then she tells Flair, right before they leave, that he has a lot to improve on. Of course, this is all made 10 times better by Bill Mercer marking out on the headset, just laughing and noting how great it is to see Flair get his. And that was fucking awesome. Like, every little bit of that exchange. Crowd blew a gasket when Sunshine popped Flair in the mouth. Now, granted, it didn't answer the question as to whether or not Flair would accept Haynes' challenge, but to be honest with you, at this point, I don't think the people gave a shit. So then we get the match. Now that Flair's left cheek is beat red and his blood is boiling over. You could actually argue Flair was fighting at a disadvantage here, now that he was distracted by all that Sunshine drama. Seriously, though, I mean, what else do you want me to say about it? It's Ric Flair versus Terry Gordy. Telling you, these guys could sleepwalk through a match together. It would still be fucking awesome. It's funny, too, because off the top of my head, I don't remember Flair or Gordy having many matches together, be it in singles or tag bouts. This might have been their only singles match together now that I'm thinking about it. That's really unfortunate, too, because these guys had natural chemistry in the ring together. You know, it's easy enough for me to sit here and say it was every Ric Flair match in the book, because that kind of sounds like I'm intentionally degrading it. I was more so fixated on Gordy's performance here. He was outstanding. And I've talked about it before, too, how when you think about the most impressive big men in the history of this sport, no one ever mentions Terry Gordy enough in that conversation. People will bring up names like Bam Bam Bigelow or Vader or even Taker, myself included. And man, it's a shame Terry Gordy never gets an honorable mention, just for being one of the more agile big men in the history of wrestling. Because he was really good. Extraordinarily good. You know, he's in there dominating Flair. It's a 20-plus minute match. Gets plenty of time. But you watch Gordy here, he never gets tired. He's just on. 100% from start to finish. You know, Flair's a madman bumping around for him. You get the multiple attempts where Gordy's trying to go for the Oriental Spike. And at the point he finally does get it on Flair, he ends up getting to the ropes to break the hold. The fans are going ballistic when he finally gets the hold put on. Of course, Flair breaks out the usual heel tricks to try and beg off and lull Gordy into letting his guard down. And right as we get to the finish, Flair is able to hoist Gordy up and then give him a backdrop overhead. And this is perfect with the way they did this. While Flair has Gordy hooked with his shoulders pinned down, Flair's also using the bottom rope to hook his foot under for leverage. Meanwhile, Gordy thinks he has the match won because he had Flair's shoulders initially pinned down. But right as Bronco Lubitsch is counting the 3 count, Flair raises the shoulder off the mat to avoid having his shoulders pinned. And of course, Gordy never saw that. So it's a It is a controversial finish, with Gordy celebrating initially, only to then realize that he didn't win the belt. Kind of took the piss out of the room, but, again, man, I couldn't take my eyes off Gordy here. Watching him the whole time, a fucking machine the entire match, never getting fatigued, just working his butt off through the entire 20 minutes. It's impressive, especially for a big guy like him. I really need to try to figure out if these guys ever had more matches prior to this, because I cannot recall for the life of me ever seeing a Terry Gordy Ric Flair match in Dallas, other than this one, obviously. I know we've seen Flair and Hayes. I don't know about Gordy, though. Part of the issue, too, Gordy had been a heel through most of his run in Dallas from like the entirety of 83 onward. So I don't think there would have ever been a period where he and Flair would have crossed paths together. They really didn't do heel versus heel all too often in Dallas, so I don't think there would have been a story sense to do it. I'll try to do my research on it and get back to you. Or someone else could let me know if you know your Dallas history better than me. But yeah, can't say enough good things about this one. Terry Gordy was great. Ric Flair kind of goes without saying. But yeah, excellent. Excellent stuff. And like I mentioned, the road to getting to that main event was slow and trudging, but it was well worth the wait. I think a lot of the other prelim matches on the show were mostly there to fill space. But, at least we got a few recognizable names along the way. But yeah, that Zumhoff-Kiniski match to open the show. What a clunker. But, thank God for Flair and Gordy. Elsewise, I might not have made it through the first 10 minutes. But as we go to round things out for this one, as always, I want to thank everybody that stops by to watch the podcast every week, whether you're watching us on YouTube or Rumble. Show the support where you can. Greatly appreciate it. So this coming Monday, we will have the Classic Review Series coming back up for WWF. And we will be looking at the 1995 Royal Rumble pay-per-view, which will substitute for the Retro Raw report, so we will not have a Raw show that we're going to run down this coming Monday. So we'll have that. We'll have the Retro NXT show, and we'll also have Friday Night SmackDown. So it'll be a packed weekend, but that's how we like to do it. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and take care. See you soon. Peace out.